Nobody warns you that doing the right thing by your daughter's fiancé would mean burying the daughter you thought you knew. I didn't understand that in one dramatic moment. It came to me slowly. In pieces I kept finding reasons to explain away, because I was 62 years old, retired, and for the first time since my wife passed, I had something in my life that felt whole again. Her name was Claire. And for 11 months, I believed she was building a good life for herself in Charleston. But I'm getting ahead of myself. For those of you just joining me, my name is Walter Osei. I spent 34 years as a fire captain in Savannah, Georgia, before I hung up my boots 2 years back. My wife, Deborah, passed from cancer 4 years ago, and since then it's just been me, my daughter Claire, and my late wife's sister, Aunt Pearl, who lives 2 streets over and has never once needed an invitation to let herself in through my back door. We are not a fancy family. We are a loud, close, casserole on Sunday kind of family, and we don't do anything halfway. Claire is my only child. After Deborah died, Claire and I got closer than we'd ever been Sunday. Phone calls became Sunday dinners at my house. Every single week, non-negotiable, treated with the same seriousness as a court date. She'd bring the sweet tea. I'd make the shrimp and grits the way Deborah taught me. And when Claire told me, 11 months ago, that she was engaged to a young man named Preston Whitfield from Charleston, I cried right there in my kitchen because it meant my little girl had found somebody to build a life with. Preston seemed like a fine young man on paper, worked in finance, drove a car nicer than anything I ever owned, always called me sir with a firm handshake. He and Claire had been dating 8 months before the engagement. She lit up different around him. I noticed it, and Aunt Pearl noticed it too. And for a long while, that was enough for both of us. Welcome back to Dad's Raw Revenge. Get comfortable. This one's going to take you somewhere. Hit that like button and drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from tonight. Trust me, you're going to want to stay for this. Here's something I need you to understand about Claire before anything else. She wasn't cold. She wasn't distant. She called me every Sunday like clockwork, and she made me feel, every single time, like I was still the most important man in her life. So when the subject of Preston's family came up, and it came up early, because in my house, family comes up immediately, her answer didn't strike me as a red flag at first. It felt more like an old wound she didn't want touched. My parents and I don't really have a relationship, she told me one evening, about 6 weeks after the engagement. We were on the back porch, the citronella candle burning between us, moths circling the porch light. My father wasn't a good man growing up, controlling, cruel, some of the time. I had to put a lot of distance between us just to become somebody. I even go by my middle name professionally now, Whitfield, not Osei for my own peace. I looked at her close. Her eyes were steady, a little tired, like someone who'd rehearsed the story so many times it had gone smooth at the edges. But saying it out loud still cost her something. I could see that too. I'm sorry to hear that, baby, I said. But wait, what does that have to do with Preston's family? Everything, she said. His parents raised him the same way mine raised me, in that same cold, controlling world. He doesn't talk about them either. We agreed a long time ago no parents at the wedding. Neither side. It's just cleaner that way. I need you to understand and respect that, Daddy. I told her I didn't need to understand it to respect it, and I meant that, because I trusted my daughter, and she'd never given me a single reason not to. What I hadn't accounted for was Aunt Pearl. It's not that Pearl was suspicious of Preston. She wasn't, not exactly. But the Osei family operates on a particular frequency, and that frequency includes a deep, old-fashioned need to know the people connected to the people we love. It isn't nosiness. It isn't judgment. We just believe you understand a man better once you've stood in the kitchen where he was raised. By the 9th month of the engagement, the silence around Preston's family had started making its own kind of noise. It came to a head on a Sunday evening in late July. I'd made a pot of Deborah's oxtail stew, the real recipe, the one that takes most of Saturday to get right. We were all at the table, me, Claire, Preston, Aunt Pearl, and my nephew Marcus with his wife. Everything was moving along fine until Aunt Pearl, who has never once in her life paused to consider whether a question was appropriate, set down her fork and looked square at Preston. Preston, baby, I got to ask you something. He smiled, easy. Sure thing, Miss Pearl. Where's your people? The table went quiet the way a table goes quiet when somebody finally says the thing everybody's been carefully stepping around. Preston's smile held, but something behind his eyes shifted, just slightly. My parents and I aren't in contact, he said. Claire's mentioned that. I know she mentioned it. I'm asking about it. Pearl wasn't trying to be cruel. She was just being Pearl. Because in our family, and I say this with love, you don't marry into a family you've never once laid eyes on. It isn't how we do things. Pearl, my voice, one low word. Pearl picked her fork back up. But the question was already sitting on that table, and no amount of oxtail stew was going to bury it. Later, after Preston and Claire had gone home, Aunt Pearl found me in the kitchen washing dishes. She poured herself a small glass of sweet wine and leaned against the counter. He's a good boy, she said. Not a question. He is. I believe that. She nodded slow. But Walter, we're going to be standing up in a church. We're going to make promises in front of God and everybody we know. And we're going to do it without ever laying eyes on one single soul from his side. His parents were cruel to him, Pearl. I understand that. I believe him. I believe him too, baby. But cruel people still exist somewhere. They got an address. She looked at me steady. I'm not asking you to fix anything. I'm asking you to know what you're walking into. She didn't say anything else, just patted my shoulder and went on home. I stood in that kitchen a long while after, but here's what I need you to understand. I still wasn't suspicious of Claire. Not really. If anything, I was worried about myself, because the thought I couldn't shake, the one that kept circling back on the drive home from anywhere, was this: what if his parents had looked at me, at us, and decided we weren't good enough for their son? I know how that sounds, coming from a retired fire captain with a paid-off house and a daughter he raised right. But Claire had built a whole different world for herself in Charleston. Corporate marketing, rooftop bars, a circle of friends who all had opinions about wine regions I'd never heard of. Her apartment looked like something out of a magazine. And sometimes, quietly, I felt like maybe I was a little too loud, too country, too much like a man who still owned a shotgun and a pickup truck for people like that. What if Preston's parents were the same kind of people? What if they had money and standards I couldn't imagine? And once they met me, once Claire saw me through their eyes, something between us changed. That was my real fear. Driving north on I-95, the following Saturday morning in September, I want to be clear, I wasn't expecting to uncover a lie. I wasn't expecting anything to be wrong. I thought I was going to meet intimidating people who might decide I wasn't refined enough for their son. I figured I'd introduce myself, take whatever they gave me, and try to convince them I'd raised a daughter worth loving. Honestly, I thought I was the underdog walking into that house. Finding Preston's parents hadn't required a private investigator. It took a routine, tedious piece of paperwork. My daughter, as it turned out, still had my name listed as her emergency contact and secondary signer on the lease of the Charleston condo I'd helped her put a down payment on years back, before Preston ever came into the picture. The property management company needed updated documentation ahead of the wedding for tax purposes, and they sent the paperwork to me directly, since I was still listed on the original filing. I was sitting at my kitchen table on a Friday afternoon when the envelope came. I looked down at the legal documentation attached: Preston's full legal name for the co-signing paperwork. Preston Michael Kessler. Not Whitfield. Whitfield was the name he used with our family. The name on the wedding website, the name Claire introduced him with to everybody in Savannah. Kessler. Out of pure curiosity, I ran a quick property search under that name that evening. A few clicks turned up an old public record, a dusty church directory listing, and a home address on Larkspur Lane in a town called Millhaven, about 2.5 hours inland. I told Claire I had a doctor's appointment out of town that Saturday. She kissed me goodbye without looking up from her phone. I got off the highway and rolled into Millhaven a little before 10 in the morning, followed the GPS into a neighborhood of modest little ranch houses, clean streets, American flags on porches, the kind of place where folks still know their neighbors by name and wave from their driveways. I slowed down. There it was, a well-kept house with a flower bed lining the walkway and a wind chime on the porch. And out in the front yard, moving slow with a garden hose, was an older man in a faded Atlanta Braves t-shirt and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, watering that flower bed with the patient calm of a man who had nowhere else more important to be. This is not what I pictured. I sat in my truck a full 5 minutes, recalibrating everything. No gate. No fancy car in the driveway. Nothing here suggested these people had ever once worried whether somebody else was good enough for anything. These weren't intimidating people. These were plain, ordinary people. And for one brief, unmistakable moment, I felt real relief. I got out and walked up that path. He spotted me when I was about 10 feet off and narrowed his eyes with that careful look folks get when a stranger's walking toward their house. "Can I help you with something?" I stopped, took a breath. "Sir, you don't know me. My name is Walter Osei. My daughter is engaged to your son, Preston." The man, Harold Kessler, I'd learned, dropped the hose. Didn't set it down, just let it fall. Water ran slow down the driveway while he stared at me, and his face did something I was not at all prepared for. It broke open, not with anger, not with suspicion, with relief. 2 years of stacked up grief finally finding somewhere to land. "Linda," his voice cracked on her name. "Linda, come out here." And in that instant, standing in the entryway of a house on Larkspur Lane, watching a retired postal worker try to gather himself back together, my whole understanding of the situation turned clean over. Inside the Kessler house, everything I thought I knew about Preston started coming apart, quiet and steady. While I drank coffee I hadn't asked for and ate cookies, Linda served me with shaking hands. The house was clean and modest and completely full of Preston school pictures, a prom photo on the mantel, a college graduation portrait where Harold and Linda stood on either side of him, beaming. Harold had his hand on his son's shoulder. Linda's face was so proud, it was almost hard to look at. These were not the faces of cruel people. These were the faces of parents who missed their son. The story came out slow. Harold had been a mail carrier for 29 years. Linda had worked as a church secretary most of Preston's childhood. They'd helped put him through Clemson scholarship money, part-time jobs, no debt hanging over him. They were proud of that. Deeply proud. When Preston moved to Charleston and started climbing in finance, things shifted a little at a time. Calls got shorter. Visits stopped. He started showing up in photos online under a different name, Whitfield. His middle name at events with people Harold and Linda didn't recognize, wearing a version of himself they didn't quite recognize either. Then came the wedding conversation. The ask for $40,000 toward the venue and the honeymoon. Harold's heartbroken counteroffer of $6,000, everything they could give without touching their retirement. Preston's response: "If you can't invest in this the right way, you don't need to be part of it." Blocked that same night. Linda slid something across the table. A birthday card, sealed, unopened, stamped return to sender in red. Preston's own handwriting on the return address label. Our address. I sat there staring at that red stamp, and then slowly pulled my phone from my pocket. I opened the text Claire had sent me the night before. The one I'd read right before falling asleep. The one that had put me on this road in the first place. "Daddy, wonderful news. Preston reached out to his parents. They finally apologized for everything and want to have lunch with you before they head out of town. I'm so excited you're finally going to meet them." The kitchen went very quiet. I looked up slow. Harold and Linda Kessler sat right across from me, completely unaware of the digital reality their son was constructing in real time. I turned the phone around and showed them the screen. Linda read it, set the phone down gently, didn't say a word. Harold looked out the kitchen window toward the flower bed he'd been watering when I pulled up. I thought about the drive over, my rehearsed introductions, my quiet fear of not being good enough for these people. I almost laughed. I almost laughed because I'd spent weeks worrying Preston's parents would look down on us, that they'd be too refined, too wealthy, too demanding. And here they were, in Millhaven, in a ranch house on Larkspur Lane, with a wind chime, and a garden hose, and 2 years of unopened birthday cards. The person who'd decided somebody wasn't good enough had never been them. It had been Claire. The difference between a good liar and a great one is that the great one never breaks character, not even at the table, not even while everything is falling apart underneath them. I didn't confront her that night. I want to be clear about that, because it matters. I drove back into Savannah a little after 2 in the afternoon, sat in my truck outside my own house for a solid 10 minutes, and made a decision I'd thought through carefully. Not yet. Not because I was scared. Not because I doubted what I'd just seen and heard in that kitchen, but because I am a man my own father raised, and my father taught me something about timing that most people misunderstand. He used to say, "Walter, whoever reacts first almost never wins. Let them finish the lie. A half-told lie is just an argument. A fully told lie is a confession." I walked into my house and found Claire wasn't even there. She'd driven up from Charleston to surprise me for the weekend and was already inside, curled up on my couch with a glass of wine, the TV humming low, completely at ease, completely unaware. "How was the appointment?" she asked, smiling up at me the way she always did, warm and easy, like I was the best part of her day. "Long," I said, "but promising." "You look tired. Want me to fix you something?" "I want you to explain why your mother's birthday card is sitting in a drawer in Millhaven with our return address stamped on it and never opened." That's what I wanted to say. "Sure, baby," I said instead. "Whatever you're having." I sat down beside her. She rested her head briefly on my shoulder and went back to scrolling wedding venues on her laptop. I looked at the screen without seeing a thing on it. On the outside, completely normal. On the inside, taking the whole thing apart piece by piece. That night, lying awake in the dark, I did what I do when I'm working through something complicated. I separated what I knew from what I only suspected, and I built a timeline. As far as I knew, Preston's real name was Kessler. His parents were Harold and Linda Kessler of Millhaven, alive, present, and heartbroken. They hadn't abused him. They hadn't been controlling or cruel in any way I could find, not according to Harold, Linda, or a single photograph in that house. They'd offered $6,000 toward the wedding, been told it wasn't enough, and been erased that same night. As far as I knew, Preston had texted Claire or she'd told me he had, claiming his parents had apologized and wanted to meet, which meant somebody was already building the next floor of the lie. Which meant there was a next floor. Which meant there was somebody they were planning to bring to that lunch. Who? That was the question I was chewing on when I finally fell asleep. I didn't have to wait long. Over the next several days, I paid attention differently. Not suspicious, I was careful about that. I didn't touch her phone. I didn't follow her around. I just listened, the way you listen once you finally understand every conversation has been happening on two levels at once and you've only ever caught one of them. I noticed Preston mentioning his boss more than usual whenever Claire called a man named Gordon Ashcroft, and his wife, Marilyn, who'd apparently been at the same charity gala Claire and Preston attended back in the spring. Small mentions. Nothing alarming. The kind of thing a person drops into conversation when they're trying to get somebody comfortable with a name before that name has to matter. She was getting me ready for them. She'd been doing it for weeks, and I'd never once noticed. I looked Gordon Ashcroft up from my recliner the following Tuesday morning, door shut, though nobody was home to hear me anyway. Senior partner at a wealth management firm downtown. His photo on the company website showed a man in his late 50s, silver-haired, with the kind of easy confidence you only get after decades of never having to explain yourself to anybody. His wife, Marilyn, turned up in a society column covering a charity gala 2 years back. Polished hair, tasteful jewelry, the whole picture. A wealthy, respectable couple. Exactly the kind of people you'd want standing beside you if you were trying to convince a close-knit Southern family that you came from somewhere impressive. There they were. I leaned back in my chair and stared at that photo a long while. That's when it hit me Claire wasn't just lying. She was trapped inside her own enormous insecurity. She'd spent a decade reinventing herself in Charleston, reshaping her identity to climb. Something our family never cared one lick about, but her new circle clearly did. When Harold refused to bankrupt his retirement for one day of theater, it wasn't a money disagreement to her. In her mind, his modesty was a threat to the polished illusion of success she'd built her whole adult life on. To keep that lie alive, she hadn't just drifted from his parents. She'd had to erase them completely. And I thought about what she must have told the Ashcrofts to get them to agree to this. Because here's what I know about people like Gordon and Marilyn Ashcroft: they didn't get where they are by being careless or foolish. For Claire to get them to sit down at a lunch table and play the role of Preston's parents, she'd have had to give them a story that made sense. Something coherent, something moving enough that two busy, important people would say yes without asking too many questions. What had she told them? I let it sit 2 days. Thursday morning, my phone buzzed with a calendar reminder Claire had added to the shared family calendar. Lunch Gordon and Marilyn, the Wexford, Saturday, 12:30 p.m. Underneath, a note. Can't wait for you to finally meet them, Daddy. This means everything to me. I stared at that note a long time. Means everything to me. I thought about Linda Kessler pressing that sealed birthday card across her kitchen table. I thought about Harold's face when he read that text over my shoulder. Yeah, I bet it does. That Thursday, I drove over to Aunt Pearl's and sat her down at her own kitchen table and told her everything, start to finish. Millhaven, Harold and Linda, the birthday card, the text, Gordon and Marilyn Ashcroft. Pearl sat across from me with her hands folded and listened without interrupting me once. When I finished, the kitchen went quiet a moment. Then she said, "What do you need?" 4 words. That was it. No lecture. No dramatic reaction. "I need to go to this lunch," I said. "And after, I need to build something bigger." Pearl nodded slow. "And the Kesslers?" "I'm going back to Millhaven after the lunch. I want to know if they're willing to be part of what comes next." She looked at me steady. "And what comes next?" "A dinner," I said. "A real one, with the right people in the room." Another pause. Then Pearl stood up, straightened her cardigan, and said, "I'll call the church hall and see what Sunday we can get." That was the whole conversation. Saturday came. The Wexford is the kind of place where the lighting is built to make everybody look a little more important than they are. I got there 5 minutes early and took a seat facing the door, like I always do. They arrived together, Claire in the middle, one hand tucked into Gordon Ashcroft's arm, Marilyn on her other side. Claire was glowing. Gordon moved with the ease of a man who'd never once questioned whether he belonged anywhere. Marilyn was all warm smiles and careful posture. I stood when they reached the table. Big smile, firm handshake. "Daddy," Claire said, her voice touched with a particular kind of triumph. "These are Preston's parents, Gordon and Marilyn." Gordon, Marilyn, not Harold, not Linda. I shook both their hands. "I've heard so much about you two. I hadn't heard a thing about them because they hadn't existed in this role until about a week ago." We sat, opened the menus, and for the next 20 minutes, I watched Claire perform with a fluency that, under any other circumstance, would have genuinely impressed me. She laughed at Gordon's remarks half a beat too fast. Referenced shared memories with Marilyn that had clearly never happened. Trips, restaurants, family moments got mentioned, and Marilyn followed along carefully, the way somebody does when they're working from a script they only half know by heart. Gordon was smoother. He asked me questions about my years with the fire department, made informed comments about property values in Savannah, generally carried himself like a man who'd done his homework and meant to be convincing. Everybody at that table was acting. The whole table was a stage, and I sat there eating grilled trout, being perfectly charming. "So, Gordon," I said, setting my fork down with the relaxed calm of a man without a single worry in the world, "Preston's told me so much about you. Sounds like you've had a real important presence in his life." Gordon smiled. "He's been like family to us." "Like family. That's everything then." "Means a whole lot to hear that." I looked at Claire when I said it. She gave me a radiant smile back. "Keep smiling, baby. I want to be straight with the two of you," I went on, leaning forward slightly, the way I do when I want somebody to feel like I'm letting them in on something. "In my family, we take things like this seriously. My late wife would never forgive me if we didn't do this properly. We'd love to host an engagement dinner next Sunday. Nothing fancy. Family, good food, a few toasts. My people just need to welcome the folks who matter to Preston before we get anywhere near a church." Gordon glanced at Marilyn. Half a second of silent calculation. "We'd be honored," Gordon said. Claire grabbed my hand under the table, so fast I felt it in my shoulder. "Perfect," I said, and smiled at her. She smiled back full, radiant, triumphant, the smile of a woman who believes she's already won. The trap was already built. She just walked right into it, smiling the whole way. If you've been with me a while, drop a comment down below. While you're at it, hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed. Over the next 6 days, I moved quiet and careful. Monday, I drove back to Millhaven, called Harold from the driveway, before I even knocked. He opened the door before I finished knocking. We sat at that same kitchen table, same coffee, and I told them about the lunch, about Gordon and Marilyn Ashcroft, about the performance, about the dinner I'd arranged. I told them I wanted them there. Linda's hands went still around her mug. Walter, we don't want to cause a scene. I looked at her straight on. My family's going to stand in a church hall and welcome whoever walks through those doors as our own. She deserves to know who she's really welcoming. I paused. You've spent 2 years mailing birthday cards that came back unopened. You deserve to be in that room, not for drama. Because you're his parents, and somebody's got to say that out loud. Harold leaned over and covered Linda's hand with his own, looked at me. What time should we be there? Tuesday, I sat down with Aunt Pearl and told her every detail. She listened, asked 2 sharp questions, and said, I'll handle the hall and the food. That was the end of it. Marcus, my nephew, wanted to say something to Preston right at the door. No, Marcus. Not one word, I told him, both hands on his shoulders. I need you to do something harder than that. Not one word, until I stand up for the toast. He looked at the ceiling, then at Pearl, who was biting the inside of her cheek, trying not to grin. Fine, Marcus said finally. But I want a double helping of that cornbread before anybody sits down, and I'm holding the door on the way out. I looked at him and nodded. That I can arrange. Every piece was in place. Pearl booked out the back room at Miss Odessa's, a soul food restaurant she'd known the owner of for 30 years, the kind of place that feels like somebody's home instead of a stage set. Long tables, white linen, warm, low lighting. Pearl handled the whole menu herself and set a small framed photo of my late wife on the welcome table, because in her words, Deborah needed to be there too. Harold and Linda drove down from Millhaven Saturday morning and checked into a motel just outside town. Harold called me Thursday night to confirm. His voice was steady and careful, and at the end of the call, after we'd gone over the details, he said quietly, Walter, whatever happens tomorrow, in that room, thank you for driving up to Millhaven, for knocking on that door. A pause. You chose right, even if he doesn't know it yet. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just told him, see you tomorrow, Harold. I pressed my good shirt Friday night. Climbed into bed beside nobody, since Claire and Prestigious were staying at a hotel downtown, and lay there in the dark, thinking about a man in a faded Braves t-shirt, watering a flower bed on Larkspur Lane. A birthday card stamped red on the front. A kitchen table where 2 people had been waiting quietly for 2 years for somebody to finally show up. Somebody was going to show up tomorrow, so were they. You can build a lie as tall as you want, but the moment the right people walk through the door, the whole thing comes down. That Saturday morning, I woke with a stillness that doesn't come from peace, it comes from certainty. I lay there a few minutes, thinking about Harold pressing his good jacket in a motel room, Linda standing in front of a mirror trying to hold herself together. 2 people who'd driven 2.5 hours down I-95 for a dinner their own daughter-in-law-to-be had no idea they'd even been invited to. Get up, Walter. Let's finish this. I drove over to Miss Odessa's a little after 4 to help Pearl set up. She was adjusting the centerpieces with the focused energy of a woman who understands that the details in a room tell people exactly how seriously you take them. She looked up when I walked in and studied my face the way she has since I was a boy with something to hide. You all right? I'm all right, Pearl. You sure? I'm sure. She crossed the room and put both hands on my face, looking at me a long moment. Deborah used to say the truth always finds the most fitting place to land, even when nobody invites it. She smoothed my collar. Let it sit tonight. I nearly lost my composure right then. Marcus stood near the bar in his good gray suit, calm as anything. He gave me a slow nod when I walked over, a nod that said, everything's ready, the room's set, do what you came here to do. They arrived at 7. I heard Claire's laugh out in the hallway before the door even opened, that particular social laugh, half a register higher than her real one. The one she uses when she wants a room to feel like a party before she's even stepped into it. She came in first. Navy dress, hair done just right, every detail in place. Gordon Ashcroft followed, silver-haired, expensive suit, moving with the natural authority of a man who's never once doubted his right to be anywhere. Marilyn beside him, polished and elegant, pearls at her collarbone. Claire moved through that room like she owned it, kissed Pearl on both cheeks, shook my hand with both of hers, laughed at something Marilyn said near the drink table, and touched her arm warmly. She was magnificent, genuinely, almost frighteningly magnificent. When she reached me, she looped her arm through mine and leaned in. "This is perfect, Daddy. Your family is amazing. This is everything I wanted." "I know," I said. "That's why I did it." She heard a compliment. I meant something else entirely. We sat. The food came: fried catfish, smothered pork chops, greens, cornbread, a whole spread Pearl had built with her own two hands. The table filled with the warm noise of a real family dinner. Gordon was gracious, asked me about my years at the department with what looked like genuine interest. Marilyn complimented Pearl on the restaurant choice, and Pearl accepted the compliment kindly while privately thinking things I'll never fully understand. Claire was glowing, relaxed, victorious. I ate. I laughed at the right moments, refilled glasses, asked questions, and by every appearance was a man thoroughly enjoying a family dinner. My phone sat face down in my jacket pocket. I had one text left to send. I was waiting on the right moment. That moment came at 7:48, in the short lull between the main course and dessert. The table was warm, the sweet tea was flowing, and Claire was laughing hard at something Gordon had said. I pulled out my phone and typed one word to Harold. Then I stood. The clink of a fork against a glass, that clean, clear sound that tells a room, "Stop. Listen." The table went still. Claire looked at me with that full, radiant smile, the smile of a woman who thinks the next 60 seconds are going to be a toast about how much I love her. I let the silence stretch a beat longer than felt comfortable. "I want to thank everybody for being here tonight." My voice was calm, even, the way my father used to talk when something in our family truly mattered. A dinner like this isn't just a nice evening. It's a statement. It's us saying, these people are real, these people matter. We don't say that lightly. I looked slow around the table. My father taught me that the people you invite to your table tell everybody exactly who you are. I paused. So tonight, I wanted to make sure we had the right people in this room. I looked toward Odessa, the owner, standing near the back wall. She'd been briefed. She knew her cue. She walked to the side door and opened it. Harold and Linda Kessler walked in. Harold in a navy blazer that didn't sit on him quite the way it used to, the kind you could tell he'd owned for years and saved for occasions that mattered. Linda in a deep burgundy dress, a small handbag held in both hands, chin up, moving with the quiet dignity of a woman who had decided, whatever happened next, she was not going to fall apart in public. They crossed that room into the silence, and Claire saw them. I was watching her face. I'd positioned myself specifically to watch her face. The color drained out of it like a tide pulling back fast, complete, total, her lips parted. Her hand, the one holding her wine glass, went completely still. The glass tipped. I leaned over without looking at her and steadied it. "Set it down easy on the linen." She turned to me. Her eyes were doing the fast math of somebody searching for the story that could still save her. I watched it happen in real time, searching for the exit, the angle, whatever version of this she could still control. "Daddy." Her voice came out thin, almost nothing. "I drove to Millhaven," I said, quiet, not loud. I wasn't performing for the room. "I talked to them 3 weeks ago. Drove up I-95 on a Saturday morning because I told myself, maybe I can fix this for her. Maybe I can hand her family back to her as a wedding gift." I let that land. I found a man watering his garden on Larkspur Lane, wearing a Braves t-shirt. Told him my name, and he dropped his garden hose. The room had gone tense and still. "Claire, your father worked 29 years delivering mail. Your mother worked most of your childhood as a church secretary. They put you through Clemson, and they did it without you carrying a dollar of debt, because they wanted you to have every advantage." My voice stayed steady, level. "They offered you $6,000 from their retirement, and you told them if they couldn't fund your life properly, they didn't exist." Her mouth opened. "You don't understand everything that happened when I sat in their kitchen," I said quietly, like a door closing. "I saw your school pictures on that refrigerator. I held the birthday card you mailed to our address that came back unopened. And while I sat there, you texted me saying your parents had apologized and wanted to meet me for lunch." I turned to Gordon and Marilyn. Marilyn had both hands pressed flat on the table in front of her, her face gone completely pale. Gordon had gone still as stone. Gordon, Marilyn. My voice shifted, something calm and respectful. I know exactly what she told you. She told you my family was judgmental, that her real parents had passed away years ago, and she asked you to play the role of honorary family so she wouldn't have to face a big southern wedding alone. She used your kindness and your standing as a prop to fill two empty chairs on a stage. I nodded toward Harold and Linda, standing near the door. Those are her real parents. Marilyn looked at Claire, one long, quiet look, the kind that doesn't need words because words wouldn't be enough anyway. Then she looked at Harold and Linda, and something crossed her face that was far worse than anger: recognition. The specific recognition of a woman who has just understood that the person she thought she knew does not exist. Gordon didn't say anything. He folded his napkin, set it on the table, the gesture of a man leaving who had decided there was nothing left worth saying. I turned back to Claire one last time. She'd stopped looking for the exit. There wasn't one, and she knew it. She just stared at me, eyes bright, jaw tight. The entire architecture of everything she'd built was reflected in every face in that room. I grew up watching my father treat everybody like they mattered. I said, the man who pumps his gas, the woman who cleans his office, a retired mail carrier from Millhaven who gave his whole life and got told it wasn't enough. I reached into my jacket pocket. That's the measure I was raised by, not the address, not the job title, not the clothes. I looked at her. By that measure, I don't know who you are. I pulled the ring from my pocket, the one Preston had given her, retrieved quietly from her jewelry box that very morning while she showered, at Harold's suggestion, so there'd be no confusion about which ring, no question of what it meant. I set it on the white linen in front of her. Not thrown, not dramatic. Just set down, quiet, the way you set something down when you've carried it too long and you're finally ready to let it go for good. Then I picked up the small floral centerpiece from the middle of our table. Simple white flowers, Pearl's choice. And I crossed the room to where Linda Kessler stood. She was fighting it. You could see the effort in her jaw, in her shoulders, in the careful, short way she was breathing the way people breathe when they're holding something enormous and can't afford to drop it in public. I held the flowers out to her. She looked at them, looked at me, and finally broke completely. Not a cry out loud, a quiet unraveling, the kind that comes after 2 years of built-up grief finally finding somewhere to go. Harold wrapped his arm around her before she could make the first sound. His jaw was tight, his eyes wet, his chin steady. He pulled her close and looked at me over the top of her head. Then he did something I didn't expect. He stepped forward, one step. Linda still tucked under his arm, and he held his free hand out to me. I shook it. He gripped hard. The grip of a man saying something his voice still couldn't quite manage. I held it a moment, then stepped back. Pearl was at my side. I don't know exactly when she'd moved. She just appears when it matters. That's simply what she does. She looked at Harold Kessler a moment, then stepped forward and took his hand in both of hers. I should have known you a long time ago, she said. I'm sorry. Harold shook her hand and swallowed once. Thank you, he managed, for raising a man like this one. He looked past her at me for just a second. In 34 years, I'd never seen Pearl look prouder. Marcus held the door. We all walked out together, me, Pearl, the Kesslers. Linda's arm through mine now, Harold and Pearl walking side by side with the easy calm of two people who just recognized something good in each other. Marcus brought up the rear. He paused at the front door, glanced back once. I looked back too. Claire sat alone at the center of that table in her perfect dress, in her perfectly constructed life, the ring resting on the linen in front of her, the centerpiece gone. Gordon and Marilyn stood near the back of the room, Marilyn already in her coat, Gordon's hand at her back, neither one looking at Claire as they made their way toward the exit. Her friends, the polished circle she'd built her second life around, the people she'd performed for, sat frozen in their seats, with the particular discomfort of folks who've just witnessed something they can't unsee and don't know what to do with their hands. Nobody went to her. Nobody pulled her aside. Nobody offered her a version of events that made it better. Nobody played the part she needed, because there were no parts left to play. The whole cast had walked out. She just sat there, finally, irreversibly seen. Marcus looked at her a long moment, shook his head once, slow, almost sad, and let the door swing shut behind him. Outside on the sidewalk, the September air was cool and clean, and downtown Savannah moved around us like it had no idea what had just happened inside that restaurant. I stood next to Pearl and took a deep breath. She put her hand on the back of my neck, something she'd done since I was a boy. She didn't say anything for a moment. Then, Deborah would have done the exact same thing. That was it. That was all she said. Across the sidewalk, Harold Kessler looked out toward the lights of the city, Linda tucked under his arm, the white flowers still in her hands. Both of them breathing that same clean September air like people who'd just gotten back something they'd stopped hoping to see again. Harold caught me looking. He gave me one nod. Not a thank you. Something there wasn't a word for. I nodded back. Some deals you close for profit. Some you close because there's no version of yourself you could live with if you walked away from that table. That night, I closed the most important deal of my life. And I didn't make a single dollar off it. Some people lie to erase the ones who ever loved them. She built a whole life on that erasure. And on a Saturday night in September, in the back room of a little restaurant on a quiet Savannah street, every last floor of it came down. If this one hit home for you, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I'll see you in the next one. The measure of a person was never in the address they gave or the name they wore. It was in a flower bed on Larkspur Lane, a garden hose dropped in relief. Love your people loud, ask the plain questions, and keep a chair open for whoever gets left behind. Somebody's always waiting for one phone call, one drive up the highway, one chance to be seen again. A small note for you. This story was written and fictionalized by AI purely for entertainment, though we hope its life lessons still landed somewhere real.